Some secrets don't fade with time. They ferment. They grow heavier, sharper, until one careless moment finally cracks them open. And this story didn't begin with a scream or a confession. It began quietly, with dirt beneath freshly trimmed roses, and a question no one thought mattered anymore. When Colonel Harrington decided to redesign the garden at his ancestral estate, it was meant to be harmless, almost laughably ordinary, the kind of project retirees take on when they want something quiet to occupy their hands, something peaceful, something safe. But beneath that calm intention, something waited. As the soil was turned and the roots disturbed, a small metal box emerged, dull with age, unremarkable at first glance, the kind of thing you might toss aside without a second thought, except for one detail. When Mrs. Harland lifted it, something inside rattled, faint, deliberate, as though the past itself were knocking from within. Later that afternoon, in the safety of the cottage kitchen, the box was opened, and the air in the room changed. Inside were no jewels, no coins, nothing flashy, just a folded piece of paper, etched with symbols and words that didn't quite explain themselves. A riddle, the kind that feels playful at first, until you realize someone went to great lengths to make sure it would be found. That's when Eleanor felt it, that familiar tightening in her chest, the instinct she'd learned to trust over decades, the one people overlook because she speaks gently, because she listens more than she talks. Riddles aren't created without purpose, and buried messages aren't meant to stay buried forever. As she studied the lines, references to shadow and stone and time itself, something shifted. Curiosity gave way to unease. This wasn't a game. It was a roadmap. And roadmaps imply destinations someone is desperate to reach before someone else does. When Eleanor suggested, calmly, almost casually, that perhaps they shouldn't mention the box just yet, a laugh bubbled around the table, a nervous one, the kind that fades quickly, because no one really believed their own joke. Deep down, they already knew this discovery wasn't innocent. The very next morning, before the village had fully awoken, before gossip could stretch its legs, the first consequence arrived. A man was found dead near the garden, a solicitor, Carmichael, his face pale against the earth he'd been studying only hours earlier. Suddenly, the riddle wasn't a curiosity anymore. It was a motive. The box buried beneath roses had bloomed into something dark, something irreversible. Eleanor stood quietly at the edge of the scene as authorities moved around her, voices low, efficient, because death has a way of demanding order even when it creates chaos. And as she watched, she noticed what others didn't. The disturbed soil wasn't random. It was careful, purposeful, as though someone had knelt there, not rushed, not panicked, deliberate. That detail lodged itself in her mind, because people reveal more in how they move than in what they say. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear Carmichael hadn't been there by accident. He'd been asking questions, difficult ones, about old property boundaries, missing heirlooms, forgotten trusts, the kind of questions that make families uncomfortable, especially when their foundations aren't as solid as they appear. Whispers traveled faster than facts through the village, and one name surfaced again and again, the Trillion family, once wealthy, now fractured by generations of resentment and half-told stories. Long ago there had been two brothers, their partnership poisoned by betrayal. One of them, Catherine, had been quietly erased from the official narrative, her claims dismissed, her voice swallowed by time. And yet here it was, a riddle signed in her hand,
guiding someone, anyone, toward the truth she believed would one day matter again. There was something achingly tender about that. Hope has a strange way of surviving, even when people don't. Eleanor sensed Catherine hadn't aired that message out of bitterness, but faith. Faith that someday the right person would find it and listen. As Inspector Hale pieced together the timeline, Eleanor noticed the gaps. Names defended too quickly, questions brushed aside too neatly, and one young woman in particular, Margaret, composed, elegant, watching everything with a calm that felt practiced, her grief carefully measured, her concern impeccably timed. It was while tea cooled untouched on the table that Eleanor realized something else. The danger wasn't over, because the riddle pointed to something more, something larger. A sundial, once standing proudly on the estate's grounds, now missing, removed quietly years earlier. Sundials are funny that way. They pretend to be decorative, but they're instruments of truth. They show time exactly as it is, no batteries, no adjustments. According to the riddle, the sundial hid a secret of its own, a compartment, a final breadcrumb meant to lead the reader somewhere sacred, somewhere overlooked. Eleanor's voice barely trembled when she said it out loud. The north wall of the old church, because history hides best in plain sight, and churches, layered with centuries of renovations and symbolism, are perfect places for truths no one wants disturbed. As they debated their next move, the phone rang, sharp, sudden. When Eleanor lifted the receiver, the voice on the other end was tight, urgent, alive with shock. Margaret wasn't who she claimed to be. She wasn't an assistant, or an academic, or an outsider drawn in by curiosity. She was blood, Trillian blood, the granddaughter of the brother who took everything and left Catherine with nothing but hope. That revelation landed hard. Motives rearranged themselves. Actions gained clarity. Eleanor felt that chill again, the one that comes when patterns finally lock into place. If Margaret knew about the trust, the jewels, the sundial, then Carmichael wasn't just a solicitor, he was a threat. Silence settled over the room after Eleanor hung up the phone, thick, heavy, because clarity doesn't bring comfort, it brings urgency. The box beneath the roses hadn't been the beginning of the story, it had been the trigger. Someone was running out of time, and people make their worst decisions when they feel cornered. As Eleanor stared at Catherine's fading handwriting, she understood something deeply human. Catherine hadn't trusted justice to arrive quickly. She trusted it to arrive eventually. That faith, buried decades ago, had finally surfaced, demanding its reckoning. By the time the truth began to take shape, it no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like a storm, the kind that gives you enough warning to run, yet leaves you frozen, because you need to see how it ends. Standing outside the old stone church, Eleanor brushed her fingers along the rough wall, as if the past itself might pulse beneath her touch. The church had stood long enough to keep secrets without flinching. As the vicar spoke casually about carvings and renovations, Eleanor's attention narrowed. One flower, carved slightly uneven, almost shy. She pressed and felt it. A shift, a breath of movement. The air changed. Loose stones don't happen by accident. When the panels slid open, silence fell heavier than any shout. Inside rested a flat metal container, tarnished, intact, waiting. When the tiny key turned in the lock, Eleanor felt that ache behind her eyes, the one that comes when history finally exhales. Inside were documents, brittle, legible, trusts established quietly, assets separated deliberately, family jewels placed in safekeeping, not for vanity, for survival. Catherine knew she would lose the battle in her lifetime, but she believed fiercely she didn't have to lose the war. Later, as Inspector Hale reviewed the papers, skepticism gave way to disbelief. This wasn't speculation anymore. It was proof. Proof Catherine was wronged, that her lineage had been sidelined, and that someone had benefited from that silence for years. The sundial made sense now, not decoration, a test of patience, of perception. Before the room could fully absorb it, another tension surfaced. Edward hadn't arrived. Absence is never neutral. It's either coincidence or warning. When he finally appeared, disheveled, alert, the relief was almost embarrassing.